Hi, this is Alessio. Hope you're well. In this video, we're going to take a look at the chart of Bitcoin and look at the sentiment readings, the most recent sentiment readings on Bitcoin. In other words, how are people feeling right now towards Bitcoin? Is it positive or negative? Are they very much pessimistic or are they optimistic? And what does that mean? Is it a contrary indication or not? Is there a clue? Join me. Alright guys, welcome back. Now really what I want to focus in this video is something quite interesting that's happening on the sentiment readings of Bitcoin, specifically the emotional sentiment of traders and investors towards Bitcoin and crypto more recently. And I'm going to explain to you what this potentially means. Now as we can see on the chart of Bitcoin, it's the daily chart of Bitcoin, Bitcoin recently dropped this month just below the September lows here. We discussed this in the previous video. Now notice that Bitcoin, despite the fact that it took out the September lows, it managed to bounce from there. Now we had a bounce, nothing significant so far, but here's what's really interesting. Despite the bounce that we saw on Bitcoin, despite the fact that Bitcoin still is holding above that 40K support, and by the way, that 40K support is very important to us. As I explained in the previous video, you may remember I said that that level, at the 40K level, is very important because if Bitcoin, it's an if, but if Bitcoin were to fall below that level, then it could initiate and trigger a bear market on the crypto. But so far, it has not done that. But here's something quite interesting. Despite the drop we had in the price of Bitcoin, notice what's happening on the sentiment readings. Here's some data courtesy of alternative.me, which looks at sentiment readings on Bitcoin. And notice that very recently, we had extreme fear on Bitcoin. As you can see here on the sentiment readings, the most recent reading that we had on Bitcoin had a low measurement of 24. Now, I should say the most extreme pessimistic sentiment, the most extreme negative sentiment we had on Bitcoin was at the beginning of January. I think it was January 8th, when we had a significant drop in the sentiment reading on Bitcoin. That was to be expected because that was actually at the point when Bitcoin dropped and hit that September low. But notice from this data that Bitcoin has been sitting in extreme pessimistic territory for some time. In fact, in the past few weeks, the sentiment and the emotional response towards Bitcoin, as you can see here, has been either fearful, fear, or extreme fear. Surely pessimism and negative sentiment is a good sign for Bitcoin, is a positive sign, right? I mean, isn't that a contrary indication for Bitcoin when everyone is turning against the crypto? Well, that's an interesting question I want to discuss in this video. By the way, I just want to tell you about a most recent poll that I did on my YouTube channel. I asked you, how confident are you that Bitcoin is going to go to 100K this year in 2022? As you'll see here, now 30% of you said you're very confident. Another 1/3 of you said you're moderately confident that it might do so. But notice that about 39% of you, or 40% of you, said that you're not very confident that Bitcoin is going to go to 100K this year. And that's actually a lot more than I expected. So I think that 40% lack of confidence that Bitcoin is going to go to 100K is quite significant. It's something we should pay attention to because it's more than usual. So it does support the negative pessimistic sentiment towards Bitcoin right now. Now you're probably thinking at this point, well, that's got to be a contraindication. I mean, if the majority of people are very pessimistic on Bitcoin, that's got to be a good sign, right? It has to be a positive sign, no? Well, we're going to do our best to answer this question in this video. Now, before we continue, I just want to take a break for a moment and tell you about something quite important. As I'm sure you know, we don't normally do sponsored ads in these videos. However, about a month ago, I asked you if it's okay for me to do sponsored ads in these videos, provided we donate all the money to charity. For example, giving all the money to charities to help the poor or to help abandoned, starving animals. And the majority of you, about 78% of you, said yes, that is okay. So I want to thank you for that. I really appreciate it. So guys, I want to reassure you that any money we get from sponsors will be donated to charity. So I hope you'll allow me a couple of minutes to tell you a little bit about our sponsor, and that is Morning Brew, who is sponsoring this portion of the video. Now, I don't know about you, but I like to check the news at least once a day to see what's going on in the world. Now, some people like to get their news from social media, some from traditional news sources, but why not try Morning Brew? In the last couple of weeks, I've been using Morning Brew to actually get my daily news. And just to tell you a little bit about it, Morning Brew is a free daily newsletter, which is delivered Monday to Sunday. And it gets you up to speed on business, finance, and technology in just a few minutes. And here's the thing, you might have noticed that traditional news can often be very dry, dull, and pretty heavy. And by the way, some traditional news sources, they often use a lot of complex words and jargon, which can confuse their readers. But Morning Brew does not do that. In fact, what I've noticed is that Morning Brew, what they do is they write their articles and their news in such a way that it's actually engaging, interesting, but also relevant and informative. Another thing I quite like about their newsletter is that it's quite concise and to the point. So for example, as you can see here, you can quickly check what's going on in the markets. For example, the major stock markets and Bitcoin. And also very interestingly, just recently I was reading this article about Microsoft and how they're going to acquire Activision Blizzard. There was another news article about phones and airplanes. And again, what I quite like about their newsletter is they deliver it in quite an engaging, interesting, and concise way. So guys, if you're interested in technology, business, and finance, there really is no reason not to subscribe. So I would really appreciate if you could check out the link that's in the description right there. Again, it's a free subscription. It only takes about 15 seconds to subscribe. So please do sign up to Morning Brew for free today. I want to thank Morning Brew for sponsoring this portion of the video and also for giving us the opportunity to help our charities. Okay, let's get back to the video on Bitcoin, and thank you very much indeed for listening to that section of the video. Now, as I was saying at the beginning of this video, it is true the sentiment readings on Bitcoin are quite negative, very pessimistic. Again, as I mentioned before, the most recent readings are showing extreme fear towards Bitcoin. It seems to show that the majority of traders and investors out there are quite negative, pessimistic towards Bitcoin. Now, at this point, you're probably thinking, well, surely that has to be a contrary indication for Bitcoin. I mean, isn't it true that whenever everybody, the majority or the herd, are extremely bearish or extremely negative and pessimistic on a market like Bitcoin, isn't that a contraindication? Isn't that a positive or bullish sign for Bitcoin? Isn't that a sign that Bitcoin could be about a bottom? So here's something very important that everybody gets wrong. It is true that in a bull market or a strong uptrend, when the price of Bitcoin drops and when the sentiment gets crushed, when everyone becomes extremely fearful, pessimistic, it is correct that that drop in sentiment, that extreme negativity and pessimistic sentiment is a contraindication and a bullish positive sign for that market. And it could be any market, it could be Bitcoin or the stock market, doesn't matter. But here's the thing, there's one exception to this rule, which it seems many people don't know about. That exception is at the start or in the middle of a bear market. Now, let me make this very clear. I am not saying that Bitcoin is in a bear market right now. As I've said before in the previous video, as long as Bitcoin remains above this support, above the structural level of support, this market structure at 40K, so as long as Bitcoin remains above the September and January lows, just near 40K, Bitcoin still remains in a technical bull market, not a bear market, okay? Now, if Bitcoin, it's an if, but if Bitcoin were to break and fall below that 40K support, that key level of support at the September, January lows, then yes, then a bear market would be confirmed. But that's only if that level breaks and only if Bitcoin sees a sustained drop below 40K. And so far, that has not happened. So again, a bear market has not been confirmed. What I'm saying is this, given the fact that sentiment readings are extremely fearful, while in a bull market, that usually results in a bottom or an uptrend continuation, there is an exception. And as mentioned before, the exception is at the start or in the middle of a bear market. Now, that means this. It means if Bitcoin does not form a bottom and does not start an uptrend very soon, I would say in the next few weeks or sooner perhaps, then it's a dangerous sign. It's a warning sign for Bitcoin. Because remember, usually in a bull market or an uptrend, when sentiment falls so low, when the sentiment of traders and investors becomes so pessimistic and so fearful towards Bitcoin and crypto, usually that's about the time when price forms a bottom and then starts an uptrend. Okay? Now, so far, Bitcoin has not done that. Despite all the sentiment readings, despite all the negative, bearish, and pessimistic sentiment we've seen, Bitcoin has not yet established a bottom or an uptrend, as you can see here. Now, that may change, but we shall see. And again, I want to stress this point. I'm not saying we're in a bear market. A bear market only gets confirmed if price were to break that support at the 40K support level. What I'm saying is that if Bitcoin wants to prove to us that we're in a bull market and we want to continue the uptrend, then it has to do something very quickly. Firstly, it must not break that support, and secondly, it must try to establish an uptrend and form a bottom very soon. Because as I mentioned in this video, given the extreme pessimism in the sentiment readings, the extreme fear, if Bitcoin fails to establish an uptrend or a bottom soon, again in the next few weeks, then it's a strong warning sign. It becomes a strong warning signal that something is not quite right, that there is weakness in this market, and perhaps the bullish environment is changing to something more negative. Now, again, we'll have to wait and see about that. We have to wait for confirmation. So that's the key thing to learn from this video, that bearish sentiment or pessimistic sentiment is not always a contrary indication. There are exceptions to that rule, as I mentioned in this video. All right, guys, thank you very much indeed. Bye for now.